Meeting is now streaming. Okay, sir. We can start
Okay.
probably if you are.
No, no,
Okay.
2 minutes.
Okay, okay,
One
Oh,
minute,
okay.
1 minute.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
One.
yeah,
No, sir. I will
you let me
just
know.
wait for. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. I will let you.
Okay, probably we are ready.
Meeting is now streaming. Okay. Okay, sir. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's talks in the Majorana-Raychaudhuri seminar series named after Ito Majorana and Professor Amal Kumar Raychaudhuri, also known as AKR. We need no introduction of AKR. He was one of the greatest physicists and teachers of the last century from India. AKR was born in 14th September 1923, so tomorrow actually is his 101st birthday, and we have gathered together today to commemorate him for this special occasion. I am excited to introduce Professor Amitava Raychaudhuri, who is also the nephew of Professor AKR. Professor Amitava Raychaudhuri did his PhD from Maryland University under Professor Oscar Wallace Greenberg, after which he did his postdoc in Oxford University and in TIFR. He moved back to India to Calcutta University as a faculty, and he was also the director of HRI from 2005 to 2011. He has worked in diverse fields of particle physics, namely QCD, GUT, supersymmetry, to name a few. Today, Professor Raychaudhuri will share his stories and memories about Amal Kumar Raychaudhuri and reflect on his impact and legacy. Thank you. Sir, the stage is yours.
Okay. To begin with, I think I have to say that I usually do not speak about AKR. I do not speak about AKR because, we are very, very close. We grew up, I grew up in a joint family. And so it's very difficult to have a perspective from a distance. And since I do not have that perspective, I usually refuse to speak about AKR in any gathering, in any public meeting. Um, but I must say that one of the organizers of this meeting, Anish Ghoshal, he was especially persuasive, and he insisted that I speak in this meeting. So I decided to have a go. The second point which I have to mention is that I am not in the specialization in which AKR worked, namely general theory of relativity and cosmology. So I cannot do justice to the famous Raychaudhuri equation. In fact, I will be extremely brief when I speak about the Raychaudhuri equation because I'm not really competent to address the thing, and many others have done so elsewhere. So it is readily available. So, what do I have in my agenda? I have the following things. I start with the timeline of Professor Raychaudhuri, and then his beginning research difficulties. He had some problems. Then I touch upon the Raychaudhuri equation, and then also I continue a little bit about his research, and then to his teaching. He is known for his research, of course, but he is also an extremely good teacher. And there are many students who pass through his undergraduate and postgraduate education who have succeeded in later life, and all of them, many of them attribute part of it to AKR himself. So I think his teaching should also be covered a little bit. And then I talk about AKR, the person, how I knew about him, and so on. And then I conclude. Please do not hesitate to stop me if you have any questions, and I will be ready to answer. AKR was born in Barisal, and he was born on September 14th, 1923. So as Shiladitya said, this is his, tomorrow is his 101st birthday. Now, there is a story about his birth date. He enrolled briefly in a school in Barisal before they moved to Kolkata. And when they moved to Kolkata, the records from the Barisal school was transferred to the Kolkata school. And by some mistake, his birth date was changed. And so his birth date on the school records is not September 14th, but something else. And in his biography, AKR mentions that he has no document to establish that he was born on this day. But be that as it may, AKR's parents were Harish-Chandra Raychaudhuri and Shurobala Raychaudhuri. His father was a school teacher. He taught mathematics, and his mother was a housewife. I had the fortune to see both AKR's father and mother, and we lived in the same family together. Now, this was very much a middle-class family, and it had roots to a landowner clan. It was not affluent, but it was certainly very proud. It was very proud of its ancestral heritage. Now, among the many influences on Professor Raychaudhuri, on AKR, one was that of the renowned historian Harish-Chandra Raychaudhuri. Harish-Chandra Raychaudhuri was the Carmichael Professor of History at the University of Calcutta, and he's very well known as a historian. And he sort of held the family together in his own way, the earlier generations of the family. And other than Harish-Chandra, also the maternal uncles of AKR were very brilliant students in their own right. One of them went into law and was very successful, and the other one went into medicine. Now, the origin of his principled nature, I think, can be traced to this close-knit family. They moved from Barisal to Kolkata at a rather early age. Now, when they moved first, they came and they stayed with Harish-Chandra Raychaudhuri in their house in Mysore Road in Kolkata, which is in South Calcutta, and AKR enrolled at the Tirthapati Institution, at the Tirthapati Institution, where many of his cousins were also enrolled. But subsequently, his father got a job as a teacher at the Brahmo Boys School in North Calcutta, and so they moved. And when they moved, then AKR enrolled in the Hindu school. AKR was particularly proud of his training at Hindu school and his undergraduate education, which was at Presidency College. AKR stood first in the undergraduate examination. He stood first, and this was in 1942. Now, in those days, in the MSc class, one could take a project. But unfortunately, AKR could not appear for on the particular date on which the projects were assigned because he was ill. And when he came, he tried to convince the teachers that he was ill and therefore he was absent, but to no avail. And so then he opted for X-ray crystallography, a very popular subject at that time, for his special paper. He did his MSc in 1944 from the University of Calcutta. Now, when he did his MSc in 1944, his class friend was in the same class, the person who AKR stood second. And the person who stood first in the MSc examination was Somarendranath Ghoshal, who was later a colleague of AKR at Presidency College. So Somarendranath Ghoshal had stood first in the MSc, and AKR had come second. Somarendranath Ghoshal studied at Scottish Church College, while AKR studied at Presidency College. Now, after his MSc, AKR wished to embark on a research career. Now, at that time, the options were very few. Either one had to move to a research institute, and in a research institute, there were some fellowships, or the university chair professors had some funds out of which they hired research fellows. Other than these, there were essentially very few things on offer. So AKR was looking around where to move. And at that time, the Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics, at that time, the Institute of Nuclear Physics, was just about to start. But AKR somehow could not impress upon Meghnad Saha, who was the founder of the Saha Institute, that he deserved a fellowship. The family had migrated from Barisal to Kolkata, which was for them a major movement. And it was hard for them to imagine, for AKR to imagine, to go abroad for a PhD. So in India, there were very few options to do a PhD, and going abroad was also excluded for him. So he had very few options. Now, at that time, Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science, IACS, was looking for a research scholar to work with Professor Kedareshwar Banerjee. Now, Professor Kedareshwar Banerjee was very famous. He had worked with William Henry Bragg, and then he was originally in Dhaka, and then from Dhaka he had come to IACS. From IACS he moved to the University of Allahabad, and then from Allahabad he came back to IACS again, at that time as director of the institute. So Professor Banerjee had a very strong reputation, and AKR was chosen as a research fellow, perhaps because of his X-ray background. His special paper was X-ray crystallography, so he was chosen to work under Professor Kedareshwar Banerjee. However, the research efforts under Professor Banerjee proved very, how shall I say, useless for AKR. He spent 4 years, but the effort didn't work out. He was asked to set up a Hadding X-ray telescope, X-ray tube. Now, setting up the tube would require a very high vacuum, and he could not achieve the vacuum that was required. He tried various things. First, he used an oil pump, which was made at the University of Calcutta at Science College it was not satisfactory. Then they bought a pump from Radon House. That pump worked, but then it had its own electrical problem, and then the electrical problem had to be fixed, and there are various other problems. So in any case, the efforts were fruitless. It didn't quite work out. So eventually, funding for this extramural project, this was a project funded by an external agency, the analog of the CSIR at that time. And so the funding stopped, and AKR lost his position. Now, it turns out that AKR continued to hold Professor Banerjee, Professor Kedareshwar Banerjee, in high respect. In his later writings, he has very good words to say about Professor Banerjee. However, he did feel, is there a question? He did feel that perhaps if Professor Banerjee took more interest in his work when he was stuck, then perhaps it could have taken off a little better. Maybe because of his other commitments, Professor Banerjee did not have enough time. So this project failed, and AKR was without a position. So he had really no option but to take up a lecturership at Ashutosh College. This was a position which was because somebody had gone on leave. So it was a vacancy only for some time, not for it was not a permanent position. Now, when AKR was leaving, then Banerjee had said that our project did not work, but I have high hopes that you will do some good work later. And this is something which AKR remembered, and he kept it in his mind later on. He thought that Banerjee did realize that AKR had put in a lot of effort, and that the project didn't work was not entirely his own fault. So disappointed and dejected, AKR joined Ashutosh College in a temporary lecturership position, and he was pushed to the wall. Many people said, he has already spent 4 years in research and not succeeded. So people said that, there are these good students who do very well in their academic career, and then later on, when it comes to research, they fail. And AKR was one such example. So he was very dejected because a lot of people gave him some similar advice that perhaps he should look for some other profession and so on. Now, this is the time when he ventured into general theory of relativity. He started attending weekly seminars at the Department of Applied Mathematics of the University of Calcutta, being organized by Professor N.R. Sen. Now, Professor N.R. Sen was a class friend of Satyendranath Bose and Meghnad Saha. So he was in the same class. There are these beautiful pictures. I could have shown that picture of Jagadish Chandra Bose sitting with his students, and among them are Meghnad Saha, Satyendranath Bose, and also Professor N.R. Sen. Professor Sen was somewhat conservative in his views, and this AKR found a little problematic, but he was very encouraging for young people. He organized a weekly seminar where people spoke about some recent work, not necessarily their own. And so it was an opportunity to learn new things, and AKR joined in those lectures, those seminars. And AKR also wrote his first few papers at that time. Now, these papers came out in Science and Culture and in the Bulletin of the Calcutta Mathematical Society. AKR himself said that Science and Culture really did not qualify as a journal, but the Bulletin of the Calcutta Mathematical Society in those days had a better prestige, and that was, in AKR's mind, his first journal article. Sen had checked the manuscripts, Professor Sen had checked the manuscripts and suggested the journals, but to AKR's surprise, he had not included his own name as a co-author. Now, this, I suppose, goes very nicely with the fact that he encouraged young people to go ahead in life. He was a very unassuming man in our Shen. But anyway, it turned out that AKR had difficulties trying to develop new ideas and discussing them with Professor Sen. So eventually, he decided not to go to the seminars organized by Professor Sen. So he stopped going to them. But meanwhile, he started publishing in General Relativity, and he has already published several papers in Physical Review by himself. Now, at that time, IACS was looking for a permanent position called a research officer. This is the lowest level position lowest permanent level position at IACS. And the position had remained unfilled. They had offered to a few people who had turned it down. Now, AKR already had a number of good publications, single author publications. So he decided to apply, and he was selected, and he joined in 1952. So AKR joined this IACS again in 1952. And at this time, he joined as a research officer, which is a permanent position. Now, the theoretical physics group, the position was associated with the theoretical physics group. The theoretical physics group was led by Professor Debidas Basu. Dr. Basu was then a reader in the department, and the director of the institute was, at that time, Professor M.N. Shaha. Professor Shaha had previously taught AKR at the MSc level, so they knew each other. So by the next year, AKR had worked out the Raychaudhuri equation. In 1952, he joined, and by 1953, he had worked out the Raychaudhuri equation. However, it was still to be published. In fact, it took rather long to be published. It took 2 years. So at that time, AKR did not have that as a publication. In any case, there was a probation period of 1 year, and AKR expected to be made permanent thereafter. However, it was not to be. AKR gave one of his reprints of his papers, one of his published papers on the general theory of relativity to the director, to Professor Meghnad Shaha. But Professor Shaha was not pleased. Professor Shaha remarked that general theory of relativity was a difficult subject. And then he checked with Dr. Basu, the head of the department, whether he knew about the work which AKR was doing. Now, Basu said, what Dr. Basu said was that he was roughly familiar with that work, but not in great detail. So then Professor Saha suggested that perhaps AKR should give a talk explaining his work to them. Now, which AKR did, and it was difficult to get a date from Professor Saha because he was a very busy person and he would often change the dates. He was by that time perhaps not yet a member of parliament, but maybe he was in charge of the DVC and so on. So he was very busy at that time, and he was not in Kolkata all the time. And eventually, though, it was possible to give that talk. But the talk hardly helped. Dr. Saha said at the end of the talk that he didn't understand anything. And AKR was asked that in order to get a confirmation, he should work in collaboration with Dr. Basu. Without that, this was not good enough. Now, AKR then went and started reading the papers of Dr. Basu, and then he noted that AKR noted an act of plagiarism on the part of Dr. Basu. Now, when I say plagiarism, perhaps I am being too strong. What AKR said later is that it was basically a copy of some paper with some small changes and some little additions to which AKR thought was insignificant. So AKR brought this to the attention of the director, Professor Meghnad Saha, and Professor Saha was actually enraged by this. He didn't like it at all. And he said that he would agree to the confirmation only provided AKR collaborated with Basu. Otherwise, if he didn't collaborate with Dr. Basu, then he should find a job in some other place. Now, finding a job was not easy at all. Is not easy today, and was certainly not easy at that time. So AKR was in a soup, but there was a fallout, which was actually a blessing in disguise. Dr. Basu refused to collaborate, and then when he went back to Professor Saha saying that it was not progressing, then Professor Saha, Meghnad Saha, suggested that he should work instead on quantum chemistry. Now, one good thing which Professor Saha remarked at that time was that since, okay, I come back to this paper later. One of the things which Saha said to AKR was that AKR said, I am not familiar with chemistry. And Saha said that, well, you know mathematics, and somebody who knows math can do everything. So, that sort of inspired Saha, inspired AKR. And AKR went and contacted Priyoda Ranjan Rai, who was the head of chemistry. And AKR was asked to see him, and he met, and he was given some chemistry books to look at, which he started reading, and he made very little progress, and he was at a loss how to do this, till he came across a paper by C.A. Coulson. Now, Coulson had made he had made some important contributions into physical chemistry. This was his paper on the application of the free electron network model to metals. So he had applied for the first time this free electron model to metals. And when AKR looked at that paper, So Coulson was the Roose Ball Professor of Mathematics. This is the chair which Roger Penrose held after a few years later. The Roose Ball Professor is a very prestigious position, and Coulson held that position, and he worked on applications of mathematics to physics and chemistry. Now, AKR noted that Coulson had used the free electron model with a vanishing potential, and he had obtained good agreement for metal properties. Now, the author remarked towards the end of the paper that the method would not be appropriate for alloys because it would be a very bad approximation to assume that the potential vanishes for both kinds of metals of the alloy. So it would not apply to alloys. Now, in a brief note published in the same journal, AKR showed very soon that the vanishing potential approximation was too drastic. Coulson had used the vanishing potential approximation. AKR showed that instead, if one used the periodicity of the lattice spacing, then that was enough to establish the result. And therefore, so long as one kept two potentials which had the same periodicity, then one could also explain metals and alloys. So this was published in the same journal in the next year. Now, Coulson soon published a second paper in which he mentioned the name of Raychaudhuri 8 times, including in the abstract. And he used the extension proposed by AKR. So is this paper here. Now, Professor Priyodaranjan Rai, who was the head of chemistry, he was very impressed by this, that Coulson had cited AKR and had quoted him 8 times in his work. And by that time, Priyodaranjan Rai had become the acting director because Saha had passed away. So he was very impressed. And he spread the word that AKR was doing work worthy of recognition. And though AKR himself thought his work was not very deep, it ensured that from then on, he would not be disturbed from his own research. Now, let me move to the Raychaudhuri equation here. Now, I don't know why this equation is cut off from here. There's a top line which is removed. Now, this is the paper in which the Raychaudhuri equation is defined, relativistic cosmology 1. I had asked AKR why he called it relativistic cosmology 1 when there was no relativistic cosmology 2. And he said that he had in mind to write a second paper, which never got written. The other noteworthy feature is that this paper was written in 1953, and it was submitted in 1953, and it was published in 1955. Now, be that as it may, here is the Raychaudhuri equation in detail. I will not want to speak about the Raychaudhuri equation. What it does is it tells us whether the universe is expanding or contracting, and it shows that the universe will end up in a singularity unless something which is very unusual happens. Now, the importance of the equation was realized almost immediately internationally. However, in India, it took a long time. It took a long time because the general theory of relativity was then not taught in the physics departments, and in the mathematics departments where it was taught more as an application of mathematics rather than physics. In any case, later work of Hawking and Penrose and Garrosh and others led to singularity theorems based on this. Now, I should speak briefly about AKR's DSc thesis. The DSc thesis was on problems in relativistic cosmology and the general theory of relativity, with 2 papers on the quantum theory of the solid state. Now, this is a very unusual way to put papers in a thesis, because there are 2 papers in the general theory of relativity and 2 in the solid state. And the thesis itself is mostly a collection of reprints. One paper is in physical review from his Ashutosh College days, and the rest are all from his days at IACS. Now, he was awarded the DSc in 1959 from the University of Calcutta. Of course, PhD is the normal degree, and the DSc degree is the higher degree. Now, the reports on the thesis were highly positive, and they were read out. They were read out in a meeting of the university's highest committee, the syndicate, and one of the thesis examiners was John Wheeler, then at Princeton. And Wheeler wrote something to the effect that you have asked me to tell you whether this thesis is worth a doctoral degree, a DSc degree. Every chapter of the thesis is worthy of a DSc, something to that effect. So the word went around that AKR's thesis was very had gotten very good reports. And AKR suddenly gained a reputation in academic circles. But as it happens in India, at the IACS, the then director, by that time Dr. Kedareshwar Banerjee, with whom AKR had originally worked for 4 years without success, he had come back as the director. So the then director, Kedareshwar Banerjee, wished to give AKR an immediate promotion. However, it was shot down by the different head of the departments of the institute, because they claimed that this would make it very difficult to run the institute. In any case, AKR was offered a full professor position at Presidency College, a non-transferable position, and he was happy to accept. Now, I go back to the timeline. AKR married in 1958, and he was married to Nomita Sen, a chemist. They had 2 sons and 2 daughters. Amitava Raychaudhuri, the first son, passed away in 2023 in Chicago. And the second son is a professor at IIT Kharagpur. The 2 daughters, one is a medical doctor, and the other, Parangoma, is a professor at the University of Calcutta. AKR received honoris causa DSc degrees from Bardwan University, from Kalyani University, and Vidyasagar University. He was a fellow of the 3 Indian Science Academies. He was not keen to travel abroad, so he refused invitations which he used to get. He spent a year, the only exception was that he spent a year at the University of Maryland in 1964 to 65, when C.A. Missner was his host. This, I list his students below, but since I'm running out of time, I move ahead. Now, AKR as a teacher, he taught in the undergraduate and postgraduate classes, and he left a lasting impact on his students. Now, why was this? The students knew that he had done some quality research, but the research itself was well beyond their ongoing classes. What the students found of more interest was the originality in the ways in which AKR would derive some result. It was always different from the standard books. And this gave in my opinion, a false sense that physics research was easy and not beyond the range of the students. So many students joined physics research encouraged by AKR. His ever thoughtful nature, indifferent to what else is happening around, added to the mystique. And though not at all unfriendly, the students remained in awe of him. Here is a picture of Presidency College at that time. AKR wrote a number of books in Bengal, some in Bengali. Some of the books are very well known, like the book on theoretical cosmology, the classical mechanics, and the electricity and magnetism books. The electricity and magnetism book has been republished now. And then he also wrote some books in Bengali, and out of which the Attojigyasa o Onnanno Rachona, this was a major help for me in preparing this presentation. He had 48 journal papers, and the last one was in General Relativity and Gravitation in 2004. That is the year before he passed away. Now, I briefly here bring out the fact that we were very fortunate at Presidency College to have three stalwarts at the same time. Unfortunately, we were not taught by Shyamol Sengupta. He was away in that year. But Professor S.N. Ghoshal and Professor Raychaudhuri, who were, in fact, in the same class when they graduated, they taught us, and Professor Ghoshal taught us thermodynamics. It was a classic. Now, here I think I talk about my own experience. This was a very close-knit family, three brothers and a sister, all of them brilliant students, many of them standing first or second in the school leaving or other examinations. When the family migrated to Kolkata, they first moved to Hemchandro's house in Mysore Road, and then they changed to South Calcutta. I've mostly covered this part. The family had little outside interest, and they were deeply attached to Tagore's works. They were also interested in music and built up an enviable collection of 78 rounds per minute records. And this included everything. It included Tagore songs, and it included Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, and so on. Now, as a member, when I was growing up, AKR's influence was all-pervading, I must say. My earliest memories were of him scribbling research equations on scrap paper, in many of them in Greek letters, which I didn't understand. But from my school days, any unsolved problem I would bring to him, and he would always give it several solutions in several different ways. Did he motivate me to choose physics as a career? I don't think he ever directly did, but eventually I chose to veer to physics, and I think he was very happy to see me back in Kolkata with a teaching position at the university. When I was abroad for my PhD and postdoc and so on, I think AKR was not particularly happy. He was agreeable, but not especially happy. So to summarize, AKR's research puts him in a very special category. It was not possible to know from his simple way of life how significant a contribution he had made. Much of his life was involved in teaching, and he enjoyed that very much. National recognition came very late to AKR, but he hardly cared. International recognition grew rapidly from his young age. In retrospect, at the time, GTR was not particularly popular. It was not in the physics postgraduate syllabus, and it was only in some mathematics departments. So getting a PhD student was, even getting a PhD student was not easy. It is amazing that AKR almost never had any research grant, and he was not even interested. In many ways, AKR set a unique example. AKR passed away in June 2005. Thank you very much. I think I finished just in time.
Okay, so thank you, Professor, for this wonderful talk. And if the audience has any questions, please unmute yourself and ask. Okay. If there is no questions, let us thank the speaker for this really interesting talk. And Professor Raychaudhuri, thanks again for accepting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shiladitya.
Okay.
So now I have to discuss.